Last video, we talked about interest groups and the iron triangle. Trying to understand how important interest groups, how powerful they are, in giving money and lobbying and pushing on the government in what's called pluralism theory. Now, we're going to talk about political action committees. And political action committees are the new powerhouse. They've always been very powerful, but they've actually become more powerful after 2010. And we're going to find out what happened in 2010, just changed the game altogether. Not only do we have PACs, we have super PACs, where we're talking, we've got millions and millions of dollars being spent to push on government to get the results that people want, get the people they want elected, to get the bills passed, to deal with certain single issues, to do it through the parties and the money, and it just keeps flowing. In 1974, the Federal Elections Campaign Act was passed. This allowed corporations, unions, and trade associations to form political action committees as a means of raising campaign funds. This changed the game. So we talked about coalition building. Well, this is the ultimate coalition. These companies and corporations and unions and all these interest groups, what they could do is they could funnel their money into a pact. And we're going to find out if they put money into a political action committee, they can lobby directly from that to the government, or they can spend the money on advertising or whatever they want. And we're going to find out that now it's actually unlimited spending and what the regulations are on that. PACs that donate to specific candidates, here's the restrictions though. They must operate under limits of 5,000 on their contributors or 15,000 to a specific party. Okay, so this is the kicker. This is the requirement. If you're a political action committee, so like corporations will have PACs, and unions will too, and trade, you name it, and single interest groups, they'll have these PACs. So it'll be like American, Citizens United. It's the famous one we're going to talk about. So Citizens United, and what they do is if they give money directly to a candidate, a Democrat or Republican candidate, or any candidate, the maximum they can donate to their campaign is $5,000. That's not that much. And the idea behind this is that, okay, you can only max out at $5,000. So they have so much influence on that congressman or woman's election if they win or lose, or giving them money to win. And they can only give $15,000 directly to a party. Like they can only give the Democrats in Missouri, for example, Missouri Democrats like $15,000, or the Missouri Republicans $15,000. That's it. They're capped. PACs that do not donate to specific candidates, as long as they do not directly coordinate with specific candidates, are not limited in their fundraising. This is big, and this is where the change is. So if you do not give money directly to a candidate and you're a PAC, so one way to get around this is maybe just create another PAC. And now things have changed that it's very hard for us to even know who's in these PACs. So if Best Buy is smart, they don't want to put all their money in necessarily an interest group like business corporations for America. That interest group might give directly only to the Republican Party. Well, if somebody does some investigative journalism, or you can even check this out, there's websites that just run it, you could see, oh my gosh, Best Buy is giving money to the Republican Party. This actually happened. This caused a little bit of an issue. And people got upset. Some people start boycotting Best Buy because they're like, oh my gosh, they give money to the Republicans. I don't want to shop there. Chick-fil-A, we know, gave money directly to anti-gay marriage campaigns. Now everybody knows about it. So there's people that boycott that absolutely refuse to go to Chick-fil-A since because they found that out. Put your money in a PAC, though. Put the money in the Political Action Committee, and there's ways of making these donations, and the money is spent, and you can spend as much money as you want on advertisement, commercials, whatever, as long as you do not coordinate with the candidate or the party, okay? They can't sit down with Josh Hawley, our senator, or Ann Wagner, one of our congresswomen. They can't sit down with them, or Cori Bush, most of your representative, and sit down with her and say, look, we're going to spend as much money on. We'll give you $1 million on commercials. How do you want these commercials to go? And what do you want? Well, we need more commercials on universal health care. That's what's real popular in my district. Okay. However, they could know that information, that data about you guys and me, and then they can spend it on their own as long as they don't talk to Corey Bush or Ann Wagner or Josh Hawley, which you guys know with data and analytics and all the information we gather on people now, it's pretty easy to do this stuff without coordinating with a candidate. So here's the first question. An interest group so single-minded that its members often vote only on one issue, ignoring a political stand or anything else, is known as a. So you've got probably the best example would be like the National Rifle Association. They're definitely an interest group, and they're very single-issued. So do you call them a one-issue group, a unit issue group, a hot button group, a single-issue group, or a mono-issue group? Okay, and it's single-issue groups. Those are called single-issue groups. Now, let's talk about lobbying. So direct lobbying is representatives of an interest group or company or an individual meet privately with the government officials. They can meet behind closed doors. And they can suggest legislation to present arguments supporting their positions. They can present data to them. They can give them their arguments. You know how we prepare for debates in class? They could literally give them the arguments. Like they could be like, okay, these are the reasons why. Here's the data. And then they could tell them, these are the groups that are going to support this bill. They can give them all this information they want. It's legal to do this as long as you're a lobbyist. You have to know there are laws. Now, you see the sign. It says you can't give money directly to a politician. That's illegal. That's bribery. But you could give the money to the politicians' campaigns and donations. That's legal up to a certain amount. So you can see here's some of the lobbying and spending from 98 to 2004. Business, would you believe it, that business spent $6 billion. That's billion, not million. $6 billion lobbying the U.S. government. Wow. So that tells you when they wrote the Recovery Act or this bill to support people and give checks out to people, you think a large chunk of that money goes to support businesses? I bet it does. They're the biggest lobbyists. They spend $6 billion, followed by health, finance, insurance, and real estate. Wait a second. Are you telling me that medicine and health insurance companies are the second biggest spenders on lobbying? If I did do some logical thinking, would that make sense why we don't have universal health care? There's a lot of lobbying against universal health care. There's a lot of money being spent by the health industry that would go out of business on this based on this idea. And then you look at this next and you have communications elections. So communications and electronics they're spending a lot of money on lobbying, about $4.93 billion to push on the government. Then it goes down to energy, natural resources. You think of your gasoline, $4.4 billion. And this was 7 years ago. Imagine what they're spending now. Finally, agriculture is $2 billion. You say, wow, food, look at the milk. Why are we consuming large quantities of milk? Well, there's $2 billion worth of lobbying. Is a lot of that information being presented biasly towards the milk industry? Is milk really as healthy as we think? I'm not saying either way, but defense, look at that $2 billion on the military. Woo, lobbying. And why are we spending all this money on jets and gear? We spend all this money on the military. Do we spend it on the soldiers? Or do we spend it on new jets and tanks and bombs and technology? I don't know. If we were to follow this money, we might think about this. Construction is $0.6 billion. Labor, unions are only 5. Labor is the smallest. So the labor, asking for people fighting for minimum wage and better treatment in the workplace, they're only spending $0.59 billion. That's still a lot of money. But can a labor organizations altogether spending, $600 million to lobby versus $6 billion on the business side? Who's going to have more say in the government, right? This is what's interesting, too. An estimated about 45% of congressmen and women, when they leave government, they become lobbyists. Wow. That's a better paying job. In Congress, you might only make like $130,000 or $150,000 a year. Senators might make closer to $100,000. But if you're a lobbyist, you can make a lot more than $200,000 a year. And what you do is you just go back and see your buddies. Like, hey, Representative Joe, remember we used to, go hang out and eat cheeseburgers and go to the Capitals hockey games or the Washington Bullets. I love me some Bradley Beal. That was my dude back in the day. He's a great basketball player from St. Louis. I saw him play actually live a couple of times in high school. So, but let's go back to that game. Let's hang out. Let's tell stories. Let's have beers and cigars. Okay. Hey, I just really need your help with this. Could you maybe, slide in a couple million more dollars towards our business in this bill? Pretty effective system. Okay, now I want you to look at this and the trends do you see on the graph. What did lobbying and spending increase? And why does lobbying and spending decrease? Okay, so what patterns do you see here? So lobbying is at 1.5 billion per year in 98, and it kind of steadily goes up. Do you see any patterns in peaking? Seems to go really up on the years, from what I see of the data, really goes up on years before and during election, and that first year with the new Congress, and then it kind of tapers off. So let's see if that's true. So let's look at 2008. There's Barack Obama. So he runs in 2008, and you could see 2008, 3.3 billion. It jumps quite a bit from 2007. And then the first 2 years after he won, it's really high, 3.5, 3.2. That's with the new Congress. And then it starts dipping, and then it dips, and it dips. And then he has to get reelected, and then whoop, you see in 2012, people are getting more reelected. So these even years, it looks like there's more money on even years. That's interesting. There's a big drop in 2016. That's interesting itself, if you had to think about that. Is it because the election happened? Did it drop because, why did it drop in 2006? Were the party, the Republicans, they won, were they going to give to the corporations and companies what they needed? I mean, if they won the election, they're going to give bills that cut taxes on corporations, which they did. Do corporations have to cut those taxes? I don't know. Something to think about. Look at the number of lobbyists. It was really where it was 20-something years ago, almost 20 years ago. It really pops in 2014. And 2009 and 10, it starts to get stable. Why? Why is that? Why is it locking up like that? Why is it steady at 10,000? It's a lot of lobbyists, by the way. Now, it's all across America. So lobbyists don't just do the federal government. You got lobbyists in Missouri that are lobbying the General Assembly. You got lobbyists that push on even the city of St. Louis, the aldermen and women. It's everywhere. Now, this is it. This is the case that changes everything. Citizens United. In January of 2010, the Supreme Court changed many of the campaign financial rules in the case of Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission 2010. This is it, guys. You got to stamp this one. You have to tattoo it on your back of your neck or something. This is a big boy. Guaranteed we're going to have to talk about this on the end of course exam, advanced placement exam, you name it. They're going to ask about Citizens United 2010. The court ruled that the corporations have a First Amendment right to express support political candidates for Congress and the White House. The ruling struck down restrictions that had prevented corporations from spending company money directly on campaign advertisement right before an election. This changes the game. And now you see the chart, how things change after 2010. The money just goes wild in political action committees. If you put money in a political action committee, according to the Supreme Court, you have a First Amendment right. Citizens United had a First Amendment right. They sued the Federal Elections Commission, which is the government. They sued the federal government that wouldn't let them spend as much money as they wanted on advertisements and on whatever they wanted to do to support political politicians, as long as you don't coordinate with the candidate. So you could buy a $3 million commercial in the middle of the Super Bowl saying that President Trump's the greatest president to ever live. As long as you didn't talk to President Trump his campaign or him in any shape or form. And your action committee, your political action committee, doesn't talk to him. You could run commercials against President Trump. A big organization was the Lincoln Project, which was conservative Republicans that were really trying to take down Trump. They want to go back to more fiscally conservative Republicanism, and they spent lots and lots of money. I don't know if you guys have ever been on Facebook or something. It'll come up. You're going to probably run into, the Lincoln Project, meaning Abraham Lincoln was a good Republican idea, where Trump is not a good Republican like Abraham Lincoln. And they spent a lot of money as Republicans to get Trump to lose his power so they can get more conservative, more traditional fiscal Republicans back in power. Completely legal. Now, they can't sit down with Joe Biden and coordinate campaigns to make sure that Trump didn't win the election, or that the next election he doesn't come back and win, or win another seat and come in the Senate or the House or whatever he's going to do. Many politicians believe that single issue groups, they stimulate the political system to solve public policy problems. They are essential to democracy. They complicate efforts to seek the middle ground of various issues. They play a unified role in American politics, or do not affect policymaking. So we ask politicians, what do they actually believe about single issue groups? So we go back to the NRA and the Sierra Nevada Club. It is C. They complicate the efforts to seek the middle ground on various issues. So if you've got everybody's always from the right or the left pushing on the government officials themselves say it's really hard to compromise and get things done because they're so uncompromising. So if you're an anti-abortion single interest group and you're going to spend all this money on campaigning and push and support behind a candidate that's anti-abortion, there is no middle ground. You can't have some more restrictions on abortion. They want absolutely no restrictions or nothing. They're going all the way. So it causes a lot of problems. Even the politicians say that these issues exist. Now, let's look at this under Citizens United. So under the First Amendment, it can't lawfully be abolished. It doesn't have a significant restraint or follows. Okay, so here's your regulating groups. Under the First Amendment, can't abolish spending on government. If I want to spend $1 billion on commercials so that Joe Biden wins the next election and I have the money, as long as I don't coordinate with him, I can't. Federal Regulations of Lobbying Act of 1946 required government individuals seeking influence legislation to register with the Secretary of State and the clerk. So we know that they be and file quarterly financial. So if the individual is trying to lobby the government directly or giving money to political campaigns since 1946, we get to know who they are. So you can follow the money if they give money directly to a politician. That's why sometimes it's a much better idea to put the money in the PACs. Maybe the money is leaving lobbying somewhat, and we're spending more money on political action committees where they could spend money to use media and analytics, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter and Instagram, and they could buy those commercials to influence you, the voter, directly. So they don't have to try to break any laws or try to give money to politicians. They could get voters to choose the more conservative or progressive or whatever representative they want in the area to get their ideas across. 1994, Congress broadened the definition of lobbyists. Lobbyists are required to report to the following: the names of their clients, their income, expenditures, the issues on which they work. So we can see what lobbyists, who's lobbying who. And we can also see who your representatives are talking to. It's pretty easy to look that information up, and it can be very hard though. It can be much more. They try to make it as untransparent as they can, but there has to be transparency. Now, no gifts are valued from registered lobbyists or firms to employee lobbyists. Okay, can't give gifts to lobbyists or firms that employ lobbyists. Okay, so you can reimburse for travel expenses. So I want to be clear. This is kind of showing you what politicians can and can't receive. So a lobbyist can't give you money directly, like a guy got in trouble for redoing his kitchen. They can't give you money to redo your kitchen in your house in Alaska, which just happened. But they could give money to your campaign at a limited amount or to your party. No reimbursement for travel expenses or lobbyists or firms that employ lobbyists. So they can't reimburse flying or travel, and no reimbursement travel costs. So real quick, just make sure your Lincoln's institutions are Political parties are a linkage institution. They'll link us to the our parties will link us to the government. We can join a party to push and connect with the government. Elections are a link institution. The election lets us determine who the government is. That's a direct connection to the government. The media is a linkage institution. It links us to the government, and that's what we're going to really hit in the next video. And then interest groups. We talked about how they push on the government, and we can give money to our interest groups.